All right. Well, hello there. Welcome to the Deadly Analysis podcast. Tonight, me and my co-hosts are all cleaned up. We've used our skin rubs, our facial masks. We've done our 1,000 sit-ups. In fact, Jim is actually going to show us his abstinent in the spirit of Christian Bale. And so now it's time to metaphorically blast some fucking Huey Lewis and the Lose. That's a great band. Good job, Noah. This intro is going well. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the 2000 film American Psycho, starring Batman, essentially. Or is it Bateman? Batman, Bateman, whatever. Sorry, getting weird. Best intro we've ever had, guys. This is going 10 out of 10. Anyway, American Psycho. It's a film that takes place in New York City in 1987, where we see a handsome, young urban professional, Patrick Bateman. I'm being attacked by my microphone cord here. Let's move that. And he lives essentially a second life as a gruesome serial killer by night. So Bateman is this wealthy New York City investment banking executive who essentially hides his alternate psychopathic ego from his coworkers and friends as he delves deeper into his violent, hedonistic fantasies. This movie has really a knockout ensemble of actors in it, including the 10-inch William Dafoe. 5 points, if you understand that reference. Or I should just call him the 10-inch Jonah. That's an inside joke. The fiance, Reese Witherspoon. The mistress, Samantha Mathis. The coworker, Jared Leto. And the secretary, Chloe Sevigny. And all of these roles play a part in this dark comedy that examines the elements that make a man a monster. That's from the IMDb page. I don't know how much of this movie is actually about examining the elements that make a man a monster. I think it's kind of about other stuff, but we'll get into that. We seem to be in kind of like a madman kick on this podcast. I mentioned that last week. I mean, The House that Jack Built, I Saw the Devil, Excision, Seven, Creep. We seem to love the idea of the madman on this podcast. In fact, it's really a huge part of horror, right? We have a fascination in the horror genre with psychopaths. I mean, go scroll the main page of Netflix and you'll find like half the shows that are advertised are on the topic of serial killers. We have this like fascination with those that are off, people that are like us, but not really like us, right? There's something there. But I think the commentary we may be able to draw from American Psycho goes well above and beyond mere fascination into the mind of a serial killer, maybe into larger issues of like class structure or power or self-aggrandizement, narcissism, things like that. I mean, there's some meta commentary floating around this movie that's a bit thicker, a bit more William Dafoe, a bit more Jonah, if you will, than the average Psycho film. So in case you're new to this podcast, what we do here is each of our hosts selects what they take to be a well-made horror film, and the rest of us critique it. We talk about it. We muse about what it says about the person who selected it. This podcast is basically therapy for those with existential baggage. And since we all have existential baggage, it's really a podcast for everyone at the end of the day. I'm kind of rambling at this point. So anyway, Jim, this was your film, American Psycho, your selection. Tell us, just give us kind of an intro here, why you selected this movie to discuss, besides, the fact that Patrick Bateman mimics your workout levels when it comes to abs. I knew that was part of the reason, but what else? Why did you choose this film?
I mean, I don't work out to porn and violent screaming in the background, but aside from that, everything else is accurate.
Did you see him wink? I saw him wink. I think he winked when he said that. Yeah.
I winked exactly like Christian Bale did in the film too. Anyway, so the reason I selected this is because I saw this film when it first came out in 2000. I came away from it with a very specific interpretation. I thought I was rather sure what this film was doing and what it was about, and on and on and on. And then I sort of went on through for the rest of my life for the next 20 years. Then I started to hear a interpretation of the film, or an interpretation of the film's ending, rather, that I found to be, and I heard it from more than one source. Multiple sources had this particular interpretation of the film's ending that I thought was just crazy. And I did what any reasonable human being would do. I put it on the list so that all my friends can talk about it. And that's why we're here. That's why we're all here, essentially. And so I'll go through the interpretation of the ending that I heard from multiple sources. And then I'll sort of go through my own interpretation of the ending and of the film as a whole. And then we can go from there, essentially. and I should also note that I am a big the books don't matter proponent. I'm a big proponent of the idea that the books don't matter. So whatever's in the book, the film is sort of a separate art piece and a separate, it's saying a separate thing because it's coming from different minds, and it's a collaborative art form. So I'm a big proponent of the books don't matter, although of course we will probably get into some of the differences between the film and the book. So the interpretation that the controversial interpretation was essentially that at the end it is confirmed that everything happens in Patrick Bateman's head, that he isn't actually a serial killer. He didn't actually kill Paul Allen. This is all in his head. And it's basically the entire movie takes place as sort of this revenge fantasy that Patrick Bateman has. And I think that that is wrong. I think that that ignores some of the satirical elements of the film, and for me, it ignores some of the most important elements of the film, the satirical elements and sort of the social commentary that you were talking about earlier. For me, it seems that if one were to arrive at the interpretation that everything existed inside his head and it was all kind of this fantasy, then that makes this film a horror movie first and a satire or anything else second. And I don't think that's true. I think this is a satire first. So what is it satirizing? And it satirizes, to my mind, the culture that Tom Wolfe described in Bonfire of the Vanities, where he called the characters that are portrayed in this film and portrayed in the book, Bonfire of the Vanities, as quote unquote masters of the universe, people for whom $1 million is $1 million income is a pittance. How could you possibly live in New York and actually be able to enjoy the city for what it is on a mere $1 million? Is kind of the ethos that the masters of the universe that the masters of the universe portrays. And so I found American Psycho to be a satire of both that culture and of our larger culture's tendency toward conformity. So the way I read the ending is that he did in fact kill Paul Allen. It's just that all of the masters of the universe are so interchangeable that it is possible for one to be sitting across from another person and not recognize that that other person is Paul or Patrick or Joe or Chris or Steve or Jonah or Ben or Shayra or whatever, that you can literally be sitting across from somebody and they are so interchangeable that they have dove into the ideas of conformity to this particular social schema to the point that they are irrecognizable from one person to the other. And so it is possible for an American Psycho to exist among these, a sociopath to exist among these people, and not only exist among these people, but actually thrive among these people, because these people thrive on sociopathic tendencies. And that's what I got out of the film. Now I can sort of back that up with specific scenes from the film. I mean, it begins with a mistaken identity, and I don't think that it's much of a surprise that it also ends with a form of mistaken identity as well. Paul Allen's not dead. I had dinner with him in London 2 weeks ago. That it's entirely possible that he was having dinner with just another master of the universe at that stage and thought it was Paul Allen. So that's kind of my interpretation of the film. That's why I chose it. That's why I think that it's sort of that my interpretation kind of differs from a popular interpretation that I've seen elsewhere. So now that I've done all that, now that I've said all that, now it's time for me to talk to all my friends about it. Yeah, I'll kind of turn it over to you guys and after giving my little 5-minute spiel on it.
go first on this?
Absolutely, sure.
Okay, so I don't. First of all, I agree the movie's funny, but only at the surface level. And if you think about it long enough, you realize it's actually a tragedy. And I think the book, I agree, is a different piece, but it helped me contextualize the movie more. I think the book helped me appreciate the movie more because it gave me a deeper nuance and understanding about the psychosis of Bateman. So I see it as a tragedy. And for all the reasons that you're saying, I think that Bateman is the victim. Everyone in the film is a bad guy, and I think that him killing other people is kind of a catharsis. At least I have to reference the book. The book's like 400 pages. He doesn't start killing people for the first quarter of the book, and by the time he does, the people that he kills are so loathsome. You're kind of relieved to see them be exterminated. And I use that term deliberately because they are trash. They're vermin. Um, because everybody looks the same, Bateman is trying to escape from this world that he's been born into and sucked into. He has no control. Murder is the only way that he's been able to gain agency to differentiate himself and escape from this uh, world that he didn't ask for. And nobody cares that people died, which kind of adds another nuance that whether Paul Allen died or not is it doesn't matter because nobody will notice, nobody will care. He's it doesn't matter in this world. And the last thing I want to say before I'm going to turn it over is I disagree that I think everything was in his head, and there are three scenes that I think would back up that point. The first is when he blows up the police car by shooting it once with the gun. That was extremely cinematic. It was completely outside of the realm of any possibility. It's kind of giving an indication that it's unreal. Everything else in the movie what seemed glued to some resemblance of a reality that we recognize, and that was the first indication that this is something else. Second was the ATM saying, "Feed me a stray cat." That's something that no ATM would say. If he was sane and it was actually happening, the ATM wouldn't say that. It's showing that it's in his head. And the third, and this is a very important and subtle one, is when he's in the dry cleaner and he's arguing with I guess, a Korean cleaning lady. And he says to her, if you don't shut the fuck up, I'm going to kill you. And then there's a very clever cut where you realize he didn't actually say that. It was what he was imagining he was going to say because it cuts to him mid laughter while he was still arguing with her. His fantasy of her stepping back, when he says, "I'm going to kill you," she steps back in horror. But when it cuts, they're in mid argument. And it's like that scene in many comedies. Like one that comes to mind for some reason is True Lies, when Schwarzenegger fantasizes about punching the guy who's having an affair with his wife, and then you realize he didn't actually do it. It's the same kind of cut that lets you know what he's thinking and then shows you what actually happened. So it's like a split screen, the expectation and the reality, but happening in one frame. And that's part one of, I don't know what part two is yet, but that's what I've written down so far.
So we've touched on two issues. The first is the end. We went straight to the end, and I'm actually really glad you did that, Jim, because that is the biggest debate with this movie, right? Like if you Google this movie, that's it. That's the big debate. I actually think that's the least interesting part of this movie. Well, let's just kind of start like whoever talks by saying just immediately if you think it was all in his head or not. I can see it both ways. I really don't know how to answer this. So here's the argument that it is in his head. The ATM tells him to feed a cat. His pistol skills are fucking unreal. They're amazing, right? Fucking Morpheus shit in this. Nobody hears the chainsaw in his apartment. That's kind of weird. But then you can make the argument nobody cares. or you can make the argument that the bodies were cleaned up by the management there so as to not make the place lose its value. I've read that as a theory. His victims' bodies disappear. No one listens to his confessions. Paul Allen isn't dead, according to his lawyer. So these are all the reasons, right? The problem I have is I was watching an interview on the Charlie Rose show where the director actually explicitly contradicts this theory and says, no, it was not meant. I made an error. It says, I mean, she almost says that, like, I made an error in this because I did not want that to come off that way. The author of the book says something similar, right? He actually went so far as to say American Psycho was never meant to be a film, and that the problem is that the medium of film demands answers, that it's the film medium itself that is making this a question of value when it really maybe shouldn't be. So I can see it both ways, but I think the first thing that the second thing rather that you started talking about the loss of identity is the most important part of this movie. Sort of the homogenization of yuppie elite culture. I think that is one of the central pieces of this film that maybe we should focus on. So we kind of touched on like the loss of identity and swapping names and how no one can remember who. But remember, one of the first scenes in this movie is Patrick Bateman looking in the mirror and saying, "I simply am not there." It starts with a loss of identity. And I think that may be something like a key to unlocking, sort of a central interpretation for the rest of the film. So I kind of hope we navigate that way throughout the course of this film, because I think there are connections to that sort of loss of identity that are relevant to us in 2019 in sort of a social media crazed culture. Connections also with sort of the materialism involved in our culture at this point, nearly 20 years later. So I hope we go that route. But what do you guys think? Shayra, Ben, do you, like, really quickly, do you think that this was all in Bateman's head or not?
Well, I mean, now that we know that the director says that wasn't his intention and maybe not the author's intention, I don't know if that would necessarily be called poisoning the well, but it definitely colors probably my certainty in what I think I already thought. I do think that the film was shot in such a way that it's supposed to give you the impression that the lines between reality and fantasy are kind of blurred. And I think that's sort of the theme for Bateman himself. We talked about this a little bit whenever we had the episode on House That Jack Built, I think. And I made the point there that the film was shot in such a way that it was meant to give you the impression of the events from the main character's point of view. And I think that's kind of what was intended here as well. So you do see these crazy things kind of happening. It seems unreal or surreal. But I only think that was supposed to be the case. Perhaps maybe the director was trying to give you that same impression that, you're viewing these events through the perspective of Patrick Bateman, and therefore they just seem absolutely crazy. Like they seem completely unfeasible, unreal. And going back to the example about the bodies in the apartment, I definitely see the point there, how that could potentially be made to sort of defend the other point of view where, he goes back, but then maybe there was nothing there at all to begin with. But I think that if you look at it from the perspective, okay, that this did happen, that it provides a stronger foundation for what I think really the main point of the movie is, because a landlord that would do that sort of feeds into the same kind of culture that would make a Patrick Bateman. They're looking for just that sort of like self-absorbed, narcissistic, here's the surface level impression. What actually happened doesn't really matter. It's just the impression that they're going to give the tenants because they care about preserving the property value. I think that kind of like explanation will really feed into the main theme of the film.
Yeah, and real quick before Shayra, remember that's Paul Allen's apartment. So it's not even Patrick's apartment. It is somebody who has disappeared, and it's entirely possible that a landlord or Paul's family or any number of people who would actually recognize that Paul Allen is a person might have cleaned up that crime scene. So it's not necessarily that if the bodies are there, then they tie to Patrick Bateman, and therefore cops show up at Patrick Bateman's house the next day. He is sort of squatting. He's stealing Paul's identity. So that does, from a plot point of view, it does sort of it complicates the idea that just because the bodies disappeared, then it must have been all in his head. But yeah, I sort of interrupted. Shayra, go ahead and what do you think?
If the director and the writer did not mean for it to come across that way. They failed miserably, and
I agree.
I'm sorry. It just seems like it is ludicrous, and in his mind, and especially with the way that they cut the ending, where she's looking in a book with all these like imagery, and it just seems like he might have been doodling while imagining this stuff so that he could cope with the mundane, ridiculous nature of the world with which they are trapped in. It makes so much sense with that ending. So if that's not what they were intending, why do you edit things the way you did? Like the part that Jonah pointed out with the cut, that might have been just bad editing then, maybe. I don't know. But it did come across as like they made it look like she went back, but then they cut right where she's still talking to him in a normal position. It makes it look like she never ever went like this. It could just be bad editing. It could be bad storytelling. It could be weirdness. But I mean, I think the theory fits within how it's edited and how they pieced it together. So it's a fun debate. Like I love that that's a debate, because that means that even though they didn't intend it that way, they managed to make their art tell that story, and it means something to people in that way. And that's just what art does, right? We look at art, we interpret it our own way from our own perspectives, and then we go, oh, okay, well, this has meaning for me. Like that, maybe I cope that way. Sometimes I imagine like slicing someone's throat while I'm talking to them and they're annoying the shit out of me, or whatever, people do. I don't do that. I'm just saying, like, some of us have wild, vivid imaginations about things, and we try to cope with the world with which we live in. So I don't know. I think that's kind of the interesting part about art, right?
Well, I just want to say that, like, when you talk about poetry and songwriting and painting, it doesn't matter what the artist meant. Once it's out in the wild, it's no longer theirs. It doesn't matter what they meant, because it's art. It's up for us to interpret. For some reason, movies aren't given that treatment, and I think they should. It doesn't, and yes, I mean, the artist, the screenwriter, the editor, the director are all welcome to say what they meant and how they interpret it. But once it's public work, it's ours. And so we have a right to say that's how we interpreted it. Whether it was good editing, bad editing, faulty interpretations, any reading of the film is valid if it's sincere. I just want to say, while I'm probably jumping ahead, but I feel like I should segue this in. Earlier, I said it's a tragedy, and I just want to add to that. Like when he's talking to the hooker, and he just brings the two prostitutes into his apartment, and he's like, "Where did you go to school? What did you want to be when you grew up?" I forget the exact questions. He just wants to have a normal conversation, and they don't care. They just want to have sex with him. And all he does is he just talks about music all the time, having these long, boring ass monologues, because that's all people are so materialistic. That's all they can talk about. And I think the key line that ties this into being a tragedy is when he's arguing with Reese Witherspoon in the car, and he says, "I just want to fit in." And I can't get that auto-tuned cover out of my head that was like passed around as a meme on YouTube, where it was like done as a weekend song, like American Psycho as a weekend song, but that they kept playing that line over and over. "I just want to fit in," and that really drills it in. It's like the chorus of the song, and that's where he's stuck. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know how to fit in, and he just wants to return some videotapes. That's like his out to escape from any situation he's in. Whether he has tapes or not is irrelevant. Anyway, I'm rambling, but I would really argue that this is more of it's a tragic story as opposed to a horrific or funny one. And if we laugh, where does that put us? I think that our ability to identify with Patrick kind of makes us see him as sort of an anti-hero. And if we're able to empathize with him, then we're better. Rather than vilifying him, I see him as kind of as a victim. But that's probably a different segue.
So oh, go ahead.
You first. Go ahead.
Okay. I believe that I interpret the film a little bit differently than you do, Jonah, but I do really agree that line, I just want to fit in. I think that's super key here. And overall, I kind of view this as sort of, obviously it's incredibly nihilistic, but sort of like the existential quandary that you see playing out through this entire film is, to me, sort of related to kind of like a search for meaning. And it just happens to be the case that within the culture that this is set and the thing that we're satirizing, that meaning is put forward as being able to be found through conformity and through a certain type of lifestyle with a certain level of wealth. You've got to do this thing. You have to own these brands. You have to, memorize these artists and their works. You have to have these routines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't necessarily see it as Patrick like trying to escape. I think that conformity. In fact, if you go to the Huey Lewis song, he explicitly talks about that being about the pleasures of conformity, and I really think that sort of colors the entire movie. I think that this is something he believes, is that he really needs to fit in because that's how you're going to find a meaningful, fulfilling life. It just isn't working, and that's where you have that loss of identity. You've become just like everyone else, and so essentially you've become hollowed out inside, and you're essentially just this carbon copy, which of course then leads to this angst and this fury that gets played out through his violence. Yeah.
Right. And I think that the satire comes, satire doesn't necessarily have to be funny, right? I mean, Jonathan Swift's Modest Proposal is certainly satire. I don't necessarily think it's all that funny. I mean, a couple lines are a little chuckle worthy, but it's taking a serious issue and extending it to taking the opponent's point of view and extending it to its logical conclusion. So Modest Proposal is the British are treating the Irish like cattle. So what would be the logical extension of that argument? Eat Irish babies. That's one of the most foundational satires in the history of the English language, and I think that same type of thing applies here. So if you take this film in opposition with sort of the Masters of the Universe culture, and you say, okay, so these authors are looking at the Masters of the Universe culture. What is the logical extension of that culture? That is sociopathy and conformity to the point of a loss of identity. Conformity to the point where you could get away with murder and nobody would notice because you can't tell the difference between the murdered and the guy standing next to him. That's what spoke so powerfully to me when I saw this film, 19 years ago, and it really resonated as a film about loss of identity, sure, but also the dangers of conformity and the dangers of the toxic masculinity that imbues that world. One of the things that I'm sure we can talk about for a while is just how masculinity is portrayed in this film, and to what degrees it is portrayed as necessarily violent. And necessarily competitive. We get that great sort of dick measuring contest with the business cards. That's one example of that. So it's just because it's satire does not necessarily mean it's a comedy. Just because, and that I think the target of the satire is what I'm interested in, as well as some of the themes that we've already been talking about.
So before we hop in anywhere else, we got a really good question in chat, and this feels like a Jim Shara question. Any of you can talk, but this is like this is what I thought of when I read this. So Dev asks, given Ellis's book was boycotted by feminists upon its release, could it be argued that a female director this is going to get us into a lot of hot water, that a female director was a studio mandated decision to temper the book's misogynistic overtones and overall public reception, or was Mary Herron the right director for the job?
I actually have some backstory on the creation of the movie that actually will help out a lot. It was originally Christian Bale was going to do the film. Everyone told him not to. They were saying, don't do this. It is career suicide. Do not make this movie. Do not be in this movie. And he wanted Mary Harron to do the directing. And then they started talking to Leonardo DiCaprio, and he was supposed to play Bateman. And they got Oliver Stone on, and they were going to have Oliver Stone and Leonardo DiCaprio. And Christian Bale was in an interview with I think it was WSJ. But anyway, he was getting interviewed about it, and they were like talking about it, and he was talking about being in the movie. And they were like, well, you know that Leonardo DiCaprio is going to be playing your role. And he's like, you just called it my role. You know I'm going to play Bateman. And I was like, oh, crap. Like, he was determined to be Bateman. He loved this piece. And he wanted Mary. He did not want Oliver Stone. He wanted Mary. He demanded that it was him and Mary. And finally, the studios were like, if you guys can do it for $10 million, you guys can do it. And he's like, we'll fucking do it. That's what we're going to do. And so they did it. So I know that it was, he really wanted her to be the one who directed that film. That was very important to him. I don't know if she might have implanted any of her ideas in that way, but you can't argue that this is a movie that is trying to hurt women like some of the feminists were doing during that time period. This is actually showing the problems of men, and most importantly, the problems of greed in 80s America, Reagan, and they mentioned Trump how many times, or Trump's wives or whatever. They're constantly talking Trump, 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 Trump in this movie. So it is showing how horrible greed and money-hungry New Yorkers in the Reagan times were. And so I think that she was targeting a lot of her animosity at men, white men probably specifically, honest. Let's be honest. Especially, you know, when you see the first kill he does in the movie is when he goes down the alley and gets upset that someone's homeless. Like, why don't you just get a job? Why don't you just work? Why are you hungry? You smell like shit. You know, he's being a total asshole. And not only does he kill the homeless guy, but he actually stomps a dog to death. So I do think this is an attack on white men. I don't know that that's Mary doing that, though, or if that was just how the original source material was anyway.
Well, I think Oliver Stone would have made a very different film, much like Natural Born Killers. I think he would have made a film like that. Mary Harron, I think, is a perfect director for this film because it does. I see it as a feminist film. I see it as a film that is, like you said, Shayra, targeting white male culture and targeting toxic masculinity. Just because it's portraying violence against women doesn't necessarily mean that it's supporting violence against women, of course. And it's portraying violence against women in the manner in which men do, not caring about what they say, viewing them only as sexual objects, viewing them based upon the color of their hair, viewing them based upon what I mean, there's that scene with Chloe Sevigny where he's talking about how she has to wear a skirt to work. I mean, this kind of 80s macho bro culture is clearly being portrayed here and clearly being pilloried. I don't see that as an Oliver Stone film. Oliver Stone has his merits, but he has never been. I've never looked at an Oliver Stone film and said, you know what, that's a foundational film in feminist feminist theory. So I think Mary Harron, whether it's studio involvement or not, it's best that it is. I think the film that got produced with a female director is much better than a film that gets produced by an Oliver Stone, for example.
I agree, and I think that it's one of the best. It's rivaled only by Mother Night. I forget who directed it, the Kurt Vonnegut novel. Those are the two best book-to-film adaptations I've ever seen. I think that the book got everything right. There are certain things that they couldn't put in that were in the book, like when he kills a kid. There were just certain things that just wouldn't work in the film. But I think it's a spectacular adaptation, and it needed to be done by a woman, but not for like social justice purposes. I think it needed a woman's perspective because it is a misogynistic source material, and sort of it gives the like a dual reading. Brett gave his interpretation, and then she's interpreting she's giving her interpretation of his reading of the world that he was creating. Now, there are two things. I mean, as despicable as Bateman is, there are two scenes, at least two scenes that are he redeems himself, that shows deep sensitivity, that are sincere. The first is when he tells Chloe Sevigny he doesn't want to hurt her. She doesn't realize what he's talking about, but he catches himself and says, "You should leave," because he actually had feelings for her, and they were beyond sexual ideations. They were like just human sympathy. And the second, and I don't remember his name as a character, so I'm going to have to reduce him to the gay guy. And I'm sorry for doing that. I don't remember his character, but the homosexual guy, he nearly kills him in the bathroom, but he catches himself. And that was a real key moment for me, because it was how nice of him to not kill him, right? Like, of all the other people he's killing, he spared this guy. And there is definitely a sensitivity towards, I guess, especially in the 80s with all the homophobia and the AIDS crisis and everything. I don't know if this makes sense, but it gave humanity.
You got me thinking of something really interesting, Joe. Now let me bounce off that. So, okay. I mean, we're talking about loss of identity. We're talking about, sort of the homogenization of a yuppie elitist culture. Maybe the gay character is the closest thing other than Bateman to someone who stands out and who isn't part of the system. Maybe he's the closest other than Bateman. Maybe that's why Bateman doesn't kill him. Maybe we could go that route. That's really interesting. You guys, we mentioned loss of identity, but let me throw a slight curveball to that and refer to some of it as superficiality. I think that the loss of identity is connected with the components of superficiality. You notice in you have to watch the intro again, but in the intro, notice that he mentions Patrick Bateman mentions the building that he lives in before he mentions his own name, which is, I think, a real key to this. Right? He's obsessed with always getting a decent table at the best places. The aesthetic appeal of his secretary, I think that was mentioned. Business card scene, the dick measuring scene, right? Like, it's clearly that's one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. When I first watched it, I'm like, what the fuck is happening here? Like, this is serious, right? It's almost like it almost looks like he's about to just rub one out when he's looking at some of these cards, when he's putting the body in the taxi, I think it was Lewis, the homosexual man, says, where'd you get that overnight bag? Fuck the body. He wants to know where the bag's from, right? It's a scene with his fiance, with Reese Witherspoon, during, I think it's the Christmas party. And she says, what does Mr. Grinch want for Christmas? And don't say breast implants again, right? It's the whole movie, right? It's almost in every scene, right? There's a sense in which all of these characters, Bateman included, they're obsessed with all the wrong things. They're obsessed with all the wrong things. And I think that is dancing around the idea of losing one's identity, being caught up in these things. So I want to throw that in there in addition to the loss of identity as we talk about that. So, yeah.
So one thing I definitely want to call attention to here, and I think it ties together caring about the wrong things like you were talking about, but also sort of like this sort of underlying feminist message in this movie, I think, calling question to the culture of toxic masculinity. So there is one scene where Bateman and his fiance are meeting. I think it's her cousins, but the two of them look like they're like early 90s grunge goth, like they could have been like members of The Cure. I don't remember the names of the characters, but they're talking about tragedies in the world, and Bateman calls attention to this laundry list of items that are quite a bit tied to social justice, I think. He's talking about promoting the rights of minorities and disenfranchised groups, while also, promoting equal rights for women and ending world hunger and clothing and taking care of the homeless and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But his friend, in fact, laughs at him when he's talking about this. And I think it's fantastic, and it calls, I think, question to another type of toxic masculinity, where you pay lip service to these types of things. It's almost like virtue signaling. This whole scene is about him virtue signaling, And I think that's brilliant to really sort of call that out, especially at the time period in which this was made, because yes, he is talking about things that actually matter, but he's making it's almost like a mockery. It's so superficial and shallow, and essentially he's just saying it just for the social recognition, that it actually does a disservice to those movements.
Yeah, I agree. I especially agree about. I mean, it's trying to sort of check mark all the aspects of toxic masculinity in its satirical lens. Let's. I do want to talk about. Yeah, I mean, you talked about this in the in our chat, Shayra, and I want to bring it up in the regular podcast. This is something that's coming in on the chat right now. I don't know where to start with your comment, Byron, but it's you basically write about how in the book Patrick Bateman is portrayed as homosexual or bi, and as a result of that, there's elements in which there is a sort of a sexual energy associated with the character Lewis, the homosexual character, and the attempted murder scene in the bathroom, and how all of those there's kind of a consummation that's being that's happening when Bateman tries to kill people.
No, you got it right. You got it right, Batman. That's right.
Yeah, I sort of summarized that, but I did it poorly. But yeah, I think that's an interesting comment as well, and I think that I think Byron and you, Ben, are right on when you start talking about the ways in which this film is satirizing. It's also satirizing that homophobia.
Well, he did invite Paul Allen over. I mean, shit, it's like
right.
Yeah, they did. I do like this interpretation though, because it would explain why he didn't kill him, and it would also explain that why he probably isn't so attached to his fiance. He probably isn't even into her. A lot of times when you're homophobic, it comes from your just hating yourself as a homosexual. So I love this interpretation. It really fits, actually, weirdly enough. But why did he wash his hands though with his gloves still on afterwards? What was the meaning of that? Or is that just nothing?
Go ahead, Shana.
No, go ahead. I have something to say, but it doesn't relate to the glove washing scene. So,
well, I think it's both. Like he's attracted to Lewis. There's a sexuality associated with that scene on Bateman's part, a sexual desire on his part, but also a disgust at his own desire based upon the social conformity that he feels he has to adhere to. And so at the same time that he's got these social pressures to be a certain type of man, as soon as he feels a desire to step outside of that box, it then he is disgusted by both his own personal desires as they conflict with the social role that he's supposed to play. And that's how I saw the glove washing scene as well.
Well, I two things. One is I see the glove washing scene as just something much simpler, almost superficial. His gloves touched a homosexual, not his bare hands, but his gloves. So he's cleaning the grime off he's cleaning the substrate, to use a Jordan Peters, the substrate that touched something that he felt was forbidden. Now, to go with that, if you look at American politics, religion in America, religion in the Middle East, this is going to really get a lot of people really happy that I'm going to say this. They're men-only clubs, right? No women allowed. And when you hang around men and it's a boys-only club, that's kind of, it's questionable about why don't you want women as part of the conversation? It's very homoerotic in the same way that wrestling is. It's male-dominated. And so there's an affection and a bromance that may turn into romance So I just think that the men only club of Wall Street investment bankers and how they're all so trying to measure each other's dicks and one up each other and out muscle each other and who can spend the most money, and it's a contest, and there's a sort of eroticism that emerges from I did it better than you in that competition. And in that men only club where women don't matter, it's inevitable that there's going to be homosexual tendencies.
It's a very
just go ahead.
yeah. I was just going to say, really, that's a really interesting. That has a lot of explanatory power because at least in this podcast, whenever Shayra's not here, I just look at Ben and Jim very differently. Something happens, I'm straight as they come. But when Shayra's not here, I'm like, damn, Jim's looking good today. I don't.
So are you saying that Shayra is the? Are you saying that Shayra is the token female that we have in the podcast?
Yeah,
I am.
Yeah.
I mean,
our tendencies at bay. Like, oh yeah, no, Ben's not as attractive as I thought he was. But when other Ben is here, then Silver Fox takes over.
but here's the thing, you guys. Now you're making my brain explode because I just realized the dick measuring contest makes so much more sense now because when it gets to Paul's card, he's sweating. That's him getting a boner from the boner. And then notice when the gay guy showed that he changed his card and he's like, look at this now. And he's like, like he was like,
yeah, didn't it really feel like that? I mean, it really did feel like he was about to like pop. I was serious.
Yeah.
When I thought that, I'm like, there's something, he's into this or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
it wasn't just dick measuring. It was, hey, look at my dick. And he was like, oh yeah, that's good. Bone. He got some bone.
He got some bone
cards. And so when all three guys sort of whip it out and then just lay them next to each other, I mean, it's rather obvious what the simplest thing there. You know?
It just occurred to me right now of the double entendre of bone. I had only seen it as like, you know, a physical like violence because the sound, I forget whose card makes the sound, but when he pulls it out of the card holder, it makes that knife sound. And so I associated that with cutting and bone, and it didn't occur to me until just now. Oh my God, I'm so thick, pun intended, that it was a penis reference. I mean, it was obvious that it was a penis reference, but that really, you know, solidifies it.
That's not the only time bones come up, right? So when he was doing his crossword, he wasn't even really doing his crossword. I don't know if you guys noticed, but the only two words in the crossword were meat and bone. And he was just writing it over and over, meat, bone, meat, bone, meat, bone, meat, bone. I think he's into bones.
Oh my God, this is throwing off every interpretation I ever had for this movie. You guys are fucking me up here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it throws off too many interpretations. I mean, it's just if we take this as a satire of Masters of the Universe era masculinity, then certainly homophobia would be a element of that culture. And if this is what is the logical extension of that culture, it would have to include some sort of gay undertones, right? I mean, I think this fits perfectly with a lot of the interpretations of the film, at least a lot of the ones that I find most convincing. So
I just want to throw in, every time you say Masters of the Universe, I think of Skeletor and Dolph Lundgren. I just wanted to throw that in there. That's okay.
I think of that song from Seinfeld, the original reference.
Second, you're right.
You're more well learned than I, since that's the first thing that came to mind.
When you say Masters of the Universe, I don't know the original reference, but I think of the Seinfeld with Master of the House. No.
Right. Jim is clearly smarter than the rest of us.
No. I just read Tom Wolfe. I think I've got the book over there. Like that's, and it's sort of this shorthand of this culture that I think was sort of at the heart of all of the 80s self-delusion. And when I think the perfect title for a book about 80s self-delusion is The Bonfire of the Vanities. And so Wolfe, I think, does it Wolf was able to put a term to a lot of the things that that are aspects of this culture, even though he may very well have stolen it from He-Man. That said, I don't take Tom Wolfe as the guy who's watching He-Man.
Tom Wolfe, if you're watching, if you're still around, buddy, we want to see your Skeletor collection. It'd be great. Okay, well, let's segued. Great job, Noah.
Sorry, Noah.
So he is Skeletor at this point. Yeah, Jesus. Yeah, so there's been some comments in the chat about like some of the best scenes in this film. We went over we went over some of the main ones, but I gotta give the scene that impacted me the most was the intro, the beginning. I shouldn't say the intro because the intro is technically in the film, it's the bar scene, but after that when he's doing his opening his morning routine, let's say. When I see that scene, actually is one of my favorite scenes in most film. Like that scene is just always stands out to me as extremely important. Besides the fact that he's ripped as fuck, that's not why I'm into this. This is the homo thing happening again. The opening the opening scene where he's working out and showering and going over his self-care routine. And one of the so I put some notes about what I noticed, and this is what actually drew me to how I interpreted the movie. Is really that opening scene had a big impact. So if you'll notice in that scene, he gives way more information than necessary. That's obvious, right? But everything is entirely materialistic. There's a sense in which it's like you start to understand from the very beginning that that self-value is tied to products, right? Keeps his body in pristine condition because it's what's outside that matters. And there's even a part at the end where he says the complete counter to that it's not what's inside that matters, it's what outside that matters. And I while I was doing the research for this, just putting my notes together, I shit you not, I found multiple articles, and I can link them on our social media, where people tried to do this exact morning routine to gauge its benefits. I'm not kidding. And this is 2019, right? Like this is sort of the meta commentary, the sort of important stuff that I got from the movie is that this is, it's not so much in 2019, I think, elitist yuppie culture, 1980s cokehead fucking Wall Street banker sort of culture anymore. This is middle class shit to a large extent now. I mean, with the commodification of value and the Instagrammable culture that we're sort of all a part of. And look, I mean, I'm not going to shit. I after this movie, I never want to take photos of my food again. Like I'm one of those guys where I occasionally do that because I'm like, oh, that looks good. I'm going to Instagram this shit. This film like totally removed any desire for me to do that because it sort of made me understand like this isn't anymore a part of that sort of culture like it was in the 80s. You now see some of this stuff in middle class American ideals. So I wonder, like, part of why this movie is so impactful is how it's aged in light of social media and in light of how we interact with one another, the sort of embedded materialism in almost fucking everywhere you look. You'll notice in this movie, there's very distinct signs of advertisements. Like the camera will pan directly on an advertisement to make you see it. It's all over. There's maybe 7 different shots of it all over the film. And I mean, as you're watching this video, you're going to get YouTube advertisements for face wash, for skincare products, probably, or I don't know, penis enlargement. Now that we've talked about that 37 times, thanks, William Dafoe. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is our language now. The commodification of these things in which we find our value through them. It's almost impossible to separate ourselves from them. It's no longer a part of that upper class yuppie culture. And I think this film finds its value in that kind of informing people in that sort of way, or at least challenging people. If there is anything like a challenge in this movie, it's finding what matters, I guess, and making sure that it's the right things. I don't know.
Well, say what you will about what I'm about to say, but I'm going to make a comparison. I'm only going to mention it once. Fight Club. American Psycho and Fight Club are both stories where you have authors who are grabbing society by the collar and shaking them violently and saying, wake the fuck up, open your eyes, look at what you're doing to this world. And they're not It's not poetry. It's not I mean, maybe it is poetic and satirical, but they're desperate pleas for people to change the way they are. And a documentary and a research paper is not going to do it, but a novelization that people will laugh and joke and shrug off as just good old fun that they can quickly forget and be a commodity are kind of like the best way to get people's attention. And both of them are, like, as I said, desperate pleas. Like, I think Bret Easton Ellis is trying, he's like shouting at us that he's not happy with the world that he's invented. He's looked into his crystal ball and saying, we have to make a change. And he created the universe of Patrick Bateman to hold a mirror to ourselves in the same way that Tyler Durden is a mirror of us. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and it sort of it brings up this another comment from Byron. Byron, you're joining the conversation quite a bit here, even in the actual podcast content. Bret Easton Ellis has mentioned being baffled by letters he gets from people saying they want to be Bateman, although he doesn't judge them for it. And I think your comparison to Fight Club is apt, Jonah. I will quibble briefly with you, Noah. You say that this is sort of a film that's saying that people should find the things that matter, find things that are not commodities. I think you're absolutely right in the first bit you say when you talk about how it's a commodification. Like, this is a world that's based upon commodification. It's a world based upon advertising. It's a world based upon the external and the appearances. I think all of that is right on. But one of the weaknesses of the film is that I think it is essentially nihilistic, because it does not actually offer an alternative. I don't think that this is a film that's saying, it's what's really good, authentic human relationships, because I don't think
So I agree. Let me clarify my comment. I also want to disagree that I don't think it's a weakness of the film that it's nihilistic. I think it's a strength. I think sometimes a film merely needs to ask the question and let the horror of that question sit, right? So I think that this is a reflection of a culture of excess to a large extent. Like, that's really what, to me, if there's anything like a sentence or two I could draw from what this film is, it's a reflection on a culture of excess, and that's it. It's not it's not a necessarily a way to fix that. It's a Black Mirror, really. It's 1980s Black Mirror to a certain extent, like, without the tech shit. Well, there is a lot of tech shit in this, but whatever. Don't need to go down that road. And I think maybe something like not getting trapped and being able to distinguish fantasy from reality. So I went back and so I said, this is now a middle class thing. Instagram is it, right? At the moment I say Instagram, you know what I'm going to say, distinguishing fantasy from reality, right? Getting trapped into craving the approval of others as a way of finding one's identity. That's Bateman's problem, but that's today's problem for a lot of people, right? So I think you're right. It ends with more or less a challenge to try and maybe we could say this, Jim. Maybe tell me if you agree with this. Maybe the challenge of the film is to try and view our own distortions of reality, right? Do you think the film pushes that far? Do you think it's still necessarily nihilistic if we say that something of one of the points of the film is something like to try and challenge our own view, our own distortions of reality? Do you think the film pushes that hard, or am I reading too far into the movie?
No, I think you're right there. That's where I agree with you. I think it does push our own distortions of reality. I think it pushes us to think about to what degree we are essentially conformist, to what degree we are commodifying our personalities, not just our external, but to what degree it's sort of like deep down, I really am just superficial. That's the quote that kind of sums up this film. I think that's Mae West. I could be mistaken on that. But the point is that I think it is pushing us to be self-aware about the degree to which we are all conformist and completely superficial. The reason I called it the film's nihilism a weakness of the film is because I am judging it based upon the genre conventions of satire. And in a Juvenalian satire, one of the genre conventions is you have to have let us not admit other impediments. And that's sort of a direct quote from Swift's Modest Proposal, where he says, let's not do all of these completely reasonable solutions. Let's just eat Irish babies. It's one section in Modest Proposal where he lists really reasonable solutions to the problems associated with Irish poverty. And I don't see such a element in American Psycho. I don't see a moment in the film where he's saying, actually, the way out of this mess is this, that, and the other, which may be asking too much. I may be imposing a little bit too much upon this film, yet I still, that's where I'm finding it a little bit, I'm finding it a 4-star film instead of a 5-star film. That's the degree to which I find it.
So for you, instead of the film ending with "this confession has meant nothing," you would like "this confession has meant nothing unless," and then we get the lesson that they were trying to tell it. I agree. I mean, I see that. I see that. To the extent that it bends, components of what films that fit a particular genre, like I can see that as being a sin. But I guess when I say I prefer that, I guess what I'm saying is really just my own cinematic taste. I like this is the Von Trier stuff, right? Like, this is the same stuff we were talking about Von Trier. I mean, that is entirely Von Trier. But I think in this film, ending it with "this confession has meant nothing," it's somber for a reason. I think that and we can get kind of to how that scene, actually, that very scene is analogous to Sartre's No Exit. There's,
oh my God.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know the reference. I mean, I don't know No Exit. However, the last line in the book is, "This is not an exit." He's at the bar. He's at the restaurant. He does his monologue about "this confession has meant nothing." He continues to talk with people about who's going to win the next election. And he tries to get up from the conversation, and he runs to the nearest door he can. But there's a sign on it that says, "This is not an exit."
Yep, that's in the film. That's in the film too. Not the dialogue, but the scene where it's panning in on him, and he says, "This confession has meant nothing." If you look in the background, there's a sign, and that sign says, "This is not an exit." Right behind him, that was placed there purposefully. I never noticed
that. I'm gonna have to watch that again, because if I were to ever come out with a music album, "This is not an exit" would be the title of the album. Because it's just like, that is such a profound. I want to read Sartre's No Exit now.
You should,
because I definitely think that, I mean, that's what makes the film. That's claustrophobic as fuck. I mean, that is terrifying, that he can't escape. He's trapped in that. Not only is he trapped in this world, but he's trapped in this cafe. You know what I mean? Like, he's basically, the walls are just closing in on him, and now he's here you are here forever. Kind of.
There's definitely analogs, especially in the end scene. Conversations amongst people that are trapped in a room that appears to be hell. Right? We could argue that this is Bateman's own hell, his own personal hell. He can't get catharsis. He can't escape. He's in his own personal hell. Right? So yeah, I mean, there is some analog there, but
oh my gosh, that means that both of the movies that we watched with serial killers end with them in hell.
Oh shit, yeah, House that Jack built too. That's interesting.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I have no idea how to segue out of this. Anything else you guys want to add? That's why I'm just thinking about this.
Actually, I wanted to bring up an issue with Bateman that he runs into all the time. I think he has a Goldilocks. I think it's Goldilocks that does this issue where he's always trying to look for stuff, but something's too hot or it's too cold, or this is too hard, this is too soft. Every time he's trying to look for something, like if he's looking at somebody, they don't care about themselves enough. They need to look better. Or, oh my gosh, they look too good. Now it's intimidating to me and I don't know how to deal with it. Or when it came to the homeless man he saw in the street, he was like, why don't you work, get a job? But, stuff like excess still kind of disgusts him in a lot of ways. Like, and this is even represented when his fiance brings in a pig and he's just like, ugh. Like, you can tell he's kind of disgusted with their displays. in many ways, but he is also disgusted with anybody who is below him as well. So he can never, ever find any kind of peace, because he is always either saying it's too good or it's too bad or it's too this or it's too that. And it's his struggle. Like, his internal struggle is never being able to find anything that he can just settle for or be comfortable with or be happy with. And that's why he's constantly tortured by it. Sorry, I just need to bring that up. I
No,
don't
that's
know if you guys
interesting.
have anything to say about
Yeah,
that.
no, I was digesting that. That's interesting. Can I just mention, if it hasn't been mentioned before, that this is a film where Batman kills the Joker? I just say that. Sorry.
I knew it was going to come up. I knew somebody was going to say it.
I had to be the one. I had to be the one.
I want to say, I want to get your opinion on this specifically, Jim, because I think that you'll appreciate this. I want to get your opinion on this specifically, probably more so than everybody else, but I would like to see your guys' opinions. Someone in the chat was talking about we should do a movie by Cronenberg. And analyze a movie by Cronenberg. Well, I had read that Cronenberg was also listed as a possible director of this film. What would you have thought of this film if it was directed by Cronenberg?
Oh, that would have been a really interesting film, wouldn't it? I think Cronenberg has the sensitivity as a director and the balls as a director to be able to, I think, pull off both sides of what this film could be. Like, it could be extraordinarily gruesome. I mean, I said that the books don't matter, and they don't, but there's a scene where like rats eat their way out of a corpse in the book, and on and on. Like, it just gets really disgusting in the book. And I think Cronenberg would probably be able to do some of that well. I think he probably has the sensitivity and the ability to be able to shoot some of the feminist angles of this film okay. I'm just happy with what we got. Like, I think this was kind of a perfect storm of a film. I think if they made it today, then you certainly can't have a Cronenberg doing it. I think a Deborah Gronick would be able to do really well with this film, and a Catherine Bigelow as well. I think a truly feminist sensibility is necessary to make this film, sort of walk the tightrope that it needs to walk without being exploitively gruesome. I think that's the problem that this one might run into if it was given to Cronenberg, though I still would like to see it.
I want to go way back to about 2 minutes ago, when you said something, just to tack on. I have a very hard time laughing when I read novels, because I feel like authors are saying, I'm going to tell a joke. Are you ready? Here comes the joke. Did you see the joke? You get the joke? You know what I mean? Like, you can just tell they're trying to be funny, and nothing is unfunnier than trying to be funny. But there were two parts of this book that had me laughing out loud. Like, I had to put the book down because I was laughing so hard. The first involves the rat. He lets, like, this woman die in his apartment, and, like, the rat comes through, like, the toilet drain. And he starts preparing this extravagant dish with, like, cheese and chopped basil and sun-dried tomatoes and freshly made olive oil, and you think that he's making a snack for himself, but no, he's feeding it to the rat. That's what's going in the mousetrap. And it made me laugh because my mom always put like peanut butter and cheese on a Triscuit to give to rats, and so this is just like an extension of just the absurdity of what he was feeding to the rats. Even the rats are living better than some of the people in the book. And the other part was when he feeds his girlfriend the chocolate-covered urinal cake, and she's eating it not knowing what it is, and she's eating all the piss and just the excrement of all like the putridness of society. I don't know. I guess you had to be there.
Jim, isn't that your favorite thing? The eating of inanimate objects that are supposed to be like food.
Favorite thing. So
I know. So I was just,
you want to make me gag at the movie, then that's exactly. We figured out how to do it. I was able to not gag at American Psycho, but if you want to make me gag at it, then yeah, feed somebody urinal cakes and cannibalized rat. Oh, Jesus Christ.
See, he's already getting sick. I was waiting for it. We are doing Raw, by the way, so you need to be ready for that. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah,
all right, sorry.
I'm not gonna rewatch it. Yeah, so I guess I don't know. Unless anybody has any other things to bring up about this, I kind of want to focus on this satire angle and like the sort of generic conventions of this film. And I'm probably going to harp on this a little bit too much, but like, do you guys see this as a satire? And if so, in what way? And can we sort of like talk about the satirical elements of this as well? I think that's what I initially found most interesting about the movie, and I kind of want to get your guys' point of view on it before we kind of close up.
Yeah, I guess I can jump in on that point really quick. So just to take this to a conceptual level first, I guess one of the biggest things that defines satire is irony. Or I believe that would be right, definitionally speaking.
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely elements. You need irony in order to make good satire, certainly.
It's unlike any satire that I've seen before, I think, because it's it's sort of like an existentialist satire. And we talked about how nihilistic the movie is. It's deeply nihilistic. And I think, as I mentioned before, I do see this as sort of a movie, not necessarily, I don't know, like it's almost like the violent stuff is secondary for me. The existential satire I see is, of course, like people are doing these things and sort of buying into this superficial culture in a search for deeper meaning, ironically leading themselves to a place where they have an utter lack of meaning in their lives. And I think that's an incredibly important lesson. I think it was done quite well. And really, if the only way that it could have been better is if they had focused less on the violence in the movie and just sort of highlighted that a little bit more. I'm not sure how they would have been able to do it because, of course, they need to show the consequence, I think, of that mode of thought. But yeah, definitely. I mean, there is a deep irony here, and it's quite dark. And I really appreciate that message just because it shows a side of ourselves that we don't look at often enough. And I think it was pointed out in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I think Dennis called it the God hole. It's like that point, that place in all of us that we're trying to fill with something. And everyone in this movie is trying to fill that with stuff and with status and with recognition and with, approval from others. And it just leads to exactly the opposite of what everyone seems to be seeking out.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Like, I don't think this is satire that I've seen done really before. It is it was unique. Maybe it's been done a lot now, but because once you do something good and well, then people will copy it. But actually, what Byron in the chat pointed out was that if Cronenberg was going to remake this or direct this film, he talked about taking out all the violent aspects of it. And I think you kind of were hinting at that maybe the violent stuff took away from what was actually horrific about the film, what was actually something that should chill you to your bone and make you very uncomfortable and feel trapped and, stuck. The violence is an escape in a way. So when we talk about horror and comedy, we've always talked about how there's the building of tension and then the release. And usually the release is supposed to be something that's more of a palate cleanser, but it almost feels like in this film, the building of tension is him experiencing life and people, and then the murders are the release, which is a very weird way to do tension release. And I think that's what it messes you up.
Right? Like I think that's the type of reversal you need in order to make a horror satire work.
I'm sorry. No, I have two comments here about that. One is that not allowing the release. First of all, not giving him that release would make a much more horrific film, if that's what you're saying. The second thing is always, whenever you don't see the monster or the thing that happens, you just hear the blood splatter. You have the idea of what happened. Somebody walks out of a room and you know they're dead, but not seeing it is way more intense than seeing it. Seeing it kind of takes the mystery away. So not having the idea that these things are stewing in his head, but not visualizing them, I think would make for a much more tense film. And it would just, yeah, that, if one, I mean, this film could get remade, and actually they made a sequel, which I didn't see, but it was terrible, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah, but yeah, because
there is no sequel. We don't speak of the sequel.
Yeah,
Right.
but I love that interpretation. The only Cronenberg movie, I'm sure I've seen more than one, but the one that I know I've seen is Crash, and that definitely could be a horror. Kind of, there are some overlaps, I think, between that film and this we could get into later. But
we will be doing Videodrome at some point, because I really want to get your guys' take on that. So we will do some Cronenberg at some point. I can't wait.
I definitely think that Cronenberg would be a great director for or something completely off the wall, like Michel Gondry or something like that. You know, something completely childish and imaginative, and then
have him his messed up take on it.
Yeah,
right.
Like
the Tim Burton kind of effect, but it's a Cronenberg effect. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, it's all stop motion. Like the murder scenes are like paper mache stop motion. But anyway.
Well, like, we're talking about satire, and a friend of mine, he was saying that, oh, you guys are going to be talking about this movie, and he's like, have you seen what Funny or Die did to make fun of it, a satire of the film? And I said, no. There is a satire video. When you guys are done watching the show, please all go look it up on Funny or Die. It is Huey Lewis satirizing American Psycho with Weird Al. And Huey Lewis is Bateman, and he's walking around the house while Weird Al's kind of drunk, and he's telling him about yes, Huey Lewis. That's, I forgot. It's Huey Lewis, according to Noah. But he is explaining to Weird Al the importance of American Psycho and what it was meant to represent in American culture and in art. And so he's doing the exact same thing that Bateman was doing about Huey Lewis's music. And it is fantastically hilarious, and you guys should check it out. So make sure.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing after this podcast. That's hilarious. That's fantastic. No, I mean, I think you brought up a really good point that I didn't get a chance to comment on, Shayra, when you were talking about how it's sort of the murders are the way that this film releases the tension, but at the same time, we also don't see as graphic the graphic level of violence that we see in the book. I think Byron, who we're just going to quote the entire thing, who said that the murders, this movie's murders look like a Disney film compared to the movie, or compared to the book. Yeah, but it serves a dual purpose. It both releases that tension, and it also works to not fetishize the violence, so that this becomes kind of a snuff film where we get to see a lot of women killed in gruesome ways. And so avoiding the fetishization of the violence, I think, is the necessary work that this director had to do in order to make this film work. It keeps the film from being too exploitative. At least in my view.
And on top of that, so if the release is the violence, do you notice the part where he finally is like horrified and freaked out, and where we have a lot of the video language that tells you that it's a scary situation happening? It's when he goes into Paul's apartment and all of the bodies are gone. That's the horror for him. It's like, where did my death and destruction that brings me my peace, where did it go?
Yeah, where did my work go? And it's kind of similar to House that Jack built in that way, because the murders almost become an art for him. It becomes a release for him. Yeah, I agree. When that's probably his most horrific moment. It's the moment when he realizes he's not going to get caught. He's not going to be released from this kind of conformist hell that he's condemned himself into. He is going to there. This confession has meant nothing. Like that's the moment, I think, that leads up to that the ending monologue that closes out the film. What about the rest of you guys? What do you guys think? Or any other topics that you want to explore with this movie?
I have a couple quotes from the author that we may want to look at. This Ellis says that GQ was inordinately helpful in costuming the characters in the book. They should have gotten credit, which is interesting. And Ellis explained that his book was really about the dandification of the American male. He says it was really about what is going on with men now in terms of surface narcissism. Beginning in the 80s, men were prettyifying themselves. They were taking on a lot of the tropes of gay male culture and bringing it into straight male culture in terms of grooming, looking a certain way, going to the gym, waxing, and being almost the gay porn ideal. You can track that down to the way Calvin Klein advertised underwear in a movie like American Gigolo, the reemergence of Gentleman's Quarterly. It kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about that. I'm just going to keep harping on the fact that there's so much homoerotic stuff going on in this movie, because that is mind-blowing to me. I didn't realize it as much until this podcast, but yeah, I thought I'd throw that out there if anyone wants to hop on it.
Yeah, the GQification of the American male, that, it's sort of it dovetails with the rise of Queer Eye for the Straight Guy and those kind of pop culture phenomena, which first I have absolutely no trouble with from a political social point of view. And it seems, I don't know if Ellis seems to have trouble with it. Like, I mean, is his idealized male the Roadhouse characters? And if that's the case, I don't think I totally agree with him. Or go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, no, I was just laughing. I don't know. It's just much like the movie. It just throws that out there and lets it hang. No answer.
Yeah, I do remember reading an interview with him where he was talking about his refusal to talk about his own sexuality publicly, because he said that American Psycho reads differently if it was written by an out homosexual male or an out bi male or an out straight male. So he refuses to talk about it, talk about his sexuality publicly. Whether he has since talked about his sexuality, I'm not certain. But when I was reading some Bret Easton Ellis, I went through a brief Bret Easton Ellis phase. When I was reading it, it did seem to be an interesting aspect of how he's trying to remove his authorial personality away from interpretations of the book.
Yeah, that's sort of the anti-Clive Barker Hellraiser sort of thing, I think. You opened it up to the floor, and I realized in the end part of my notes I had a couple questions that I wanted to ask the panel here. And forgive me, these are so Noah questions that they're not like important or intelligent at all. As I'm reading them, I'm kind of laughing to myself. If you were going to have a night out on the town, guys, would you rather have it with Patrick Bateman or Joseph from Creep? Which psycho would you rather have a night with?
Bateman, hands down.
Really?
First of all, we would go to better restaurants with Patrick. There's no doubt that I would get I would get a table at the Orso if I went out with Patrick Bateman on a night in the town. But yeah, I'll let everybody else. But I've got sort of a corollary to that question.
All right.
When you let's have everybody else answer. Patrick Bateman or Joseph from Creep.
Obviously Joseph, because tubby time would be so much fun. Just
great minds think alike. If you're not joking, because I would also choose Joseph from Creep.
Yeah, no, I do like Joseph. But I honestly think that as a woman, for me, Bateman would be such a fucking prick to me, and I may have to slap him in the fucking soft face. Like, if he ever tried talking to me the way he talks to other women, I would have splashed a drink in his face, old-fashioned style, or just made a big old scene, because I know that scenes are what really pisses him off too. So I don't think we'd get along very well.
Yeah, the only thing Joseph would do with you is he would say, "This is awkward, Shayra," and the reason it's awkward is I'm a male and you're a female, and he would take his towel off and request, that you would have to request
and show a very large member.
Yeah, and that's it, and that's the extent. No pun intended. That's the extent of the negative interaction you would have as a female with Joseph. Probably.
Yeah, it is a female who gets the better of Joseph, but not.
Yep, that's right.
No female gets the better of Patrick Bateman. Maybe it's just white male privilege that means having a dinner at the Orso with and the Dorsia with Patrick Bateman. What about you, Ben? What do you think?
Oh no, it's Bateman hands down. I'm definitely going to lean heavily on my white male privilege on that, but also because I sort of get the draw of the experience of very nice sort of 5-star restaurants with 12 courses of very small plates of food that you can take pictures of and post on Instagram. I totally get it.
You are the problem. You are the problem.
And you know what? I'm completely okay with that.
I'm the problem, Ben. What about you, Jonah?
You're not going to like my answer. I haven't seen Creep yet, so ask me a different question. Give me.
Oh my God! Wait, we have to strangle him.
Oh no!
Ask me another. Give me another choice.
What are the other horror films we've done that have?
I know.
Okay.
Would you rather go out with Bateman or The Tire?
Well, The Tire.
Oh, The Tire. Okay.
Look at his shirt. He's got the tire on his shirt.
But The Tire.
Oh my God. All right, what about you? It's your question. What do you are you
I'm Joseph. I'm totally Joseph.
Listen, I posted in the group the video I referenced earlier about the song, the Weekend song that's to the American Psycho. I'm gonna request that you put that in link it in the podcast, like link it in the YouTube video or in the podcast notes or whatever.
Hell yeah.
Okay.
Done.
Yeah. So
okay.
I don't. I guess a better choice. We haven't done. What is it? My movie, Peeping Tom. We haven't done. It was my choice between Bateman and him. Tom is way more. Tom. And that's probably a good comparison. Actually, it would definitely be Bateman, but Tom is definitely more sympathetic, I think. I don't know. That's actually. I need to think about that. I need to go to my cave and think about that.
We have prompted a good question for Jonah. I like this. Yeah. All right. What does Dorsia represent? I got to know that from you guys.
Before we do that, there's one sort of question that sort of dovetails with your would you rather Bateman or Joseph, and that was the I think one of the things that this film sort of falls into that I'm kind of ambivalent about is when I watch this movie, and I've seen it a couple times, and each time I'm a little bit jealous of Patrick Bateman's life, even though I know that the film is satirizing Bateman's life and condemning my own jealousy. And there's like the idea of having a job where I don't have to work because we never see Patrick work, having a income that allows me to live on 81st overlooking the park. Yes, please. In that apartment. Yes, please. Having an income where I can go to the Dorsia, and which I don't think is actually a real restaurant. I know that the Orso is. They mentioned the Orso, and I've actually eaten at the Orso, and now you know why I'm jealous of it. And so I think that's one of the interesting things about satirical or condemning films that condemn the lifestyle that they portray. In some cases, in many cases, the film is explicitly saying lifestyle is bad, but at the same time, there are moments in this film where it's also lifestyle is badass, and I found that to be I found there to be sort of an ambivalence in myself as I was watching that film, or watching American Psycho. Am I the only one who is really doubling down on white male privilege right now, or
we should all say yes, even though we're going to say no. We should say
we
yes.
all want white male privilege. That is a truth. Okay, that's why it's called privilege. You want it.
I don't think I want white male privilege in the form that it exists in today. I don't want to be complicit, and I don't want to be normal or whatever, like the majority is. I don't want that. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not saying I want to be a minority and oppressed, but I don't want to be elite, if that's the right way to put it.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and be complicit. Let me explain why, because it's fucking awesome. Look, I guess like the equivalent where I am in Chicago of Dorsia would be Alinea. It's a world-class restaurant. It's extremely expensive, very hard to get into, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's normal to want to be able to do stuff like that and go to these kinds of places. It's just how it's portrayed and how it's done, why it's done. It's really the why that is really the kicker here. Dorsia in the movie and perhaps in the book, I think, is an icon. And it's really just primarily used to display a certain type of lifestyle. It's to show that you do fit in. And that's really 100% it. Like, of course you want to be seen there. They really care about who's in the restaurant when they go, because they want to be seen enjoying that food with the other people who are just like them, who they want to fit in with. And that's the extent of what they're thinking about whenever they go to places like this. But maybe it is privileged to think this way, but I do think that it's natural to want to be able to do amazing things and have amazing experiences. And to be completely fair and completely honest, the things that these types of people do are amazing. They just do them for the wrong reason, I think. So if you're going to go to a place like Dorsia or Alinea, or you're going to have a yacht and you're going to go out on the ocean, or like you're going to drive your Lamborghini, that's a really awesome experience that perhaps you could not fall into their same pitfalls by using them the right way and enjoying them with other people. You know what I mean? It's really about the experience versus the icon. And if you can go with one versus the other, I think you can avoid the trap that they're falling into in this movie.
I'm not saying you're wrong, because
I think that's a good point, though.
I'm not saying you're wrong, because this is not a matter of right or wrong. This is an opinion. So I don't agree with your opinion, but I'm not saying you're wrong. If people like Casey Neistat, if you watch his videos where he's like jet skiing on the back, he's a huge YouTuber. He has 1 million subscribers, and he does all this crazy shit. He has sponsorships from out the wazoo, and everything is a montage of him. You know, it's like his life is that people are awesome, like videos, basically. He drives expensive cars, gets fast cars, skydiving and rock climbing, and, you know, the Alps, and, you know, jet skiing with like naked supermodels. And I don't, that's completely boring and unattractive to me. I mean, most people want that life, but I don't. He's the one who's doing it right. You know, I don't think he's like, you know, people in American Psycho, but he's the one who is living that extravagant life, that elite life that supposedly we all want, that I want no part of. Second question, is Dorsia a real restaurant? Like an actual?
No,
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so.
Is some of the other places they mention are real restaurants, though.
I just want to point out, okay, so we need to differentiate certain factors in here, and maybe this is where we'll all get on the same page. There's a difference between flexing and enjoying something that's really awesome that you actually enjoy doing. Flexing is when you're just trying to show off and let everybody know how great you are, like try to show off that you have a lot of money. I love going out to really nice restaurants, having really delicious, wonderful food with my friends, but I don't do it to show off in front of a bunch of people or even to really network. It's more of a social interaction, and there's bonding moments. And when you do something extraordinary or out of, you know, what your mundane life does, those extraordinary moments stick in your memory a lot more, and you're creating lasting memories with people that you care about. If you make it about that, then it can be a fantastic experience, a wonderful, beautiful, lovely experience. But if you're going to places just to be seen and to show off your newest dress because you want everybody to be jealous of you, those kinds of aspirations are probably going to lead you down a path of to depression, you know? So like, I know that, Noah, I see the posts that your wife does, and they're beautiful pictures of wonderful places she goes to, delicious food she's eating, but it never feels like a flex. It's never like, I get to do this and you all suck, be jealous. It's like, look at all my wonderful friends and all of my happy things that I'm enjoying, and yay. It's about attitude.
I'm gonna tell her to flex now. Now I'm gonna tell her to flex.
No.
I think
No.
Shayra just said that Elle is the hero of American Psycho.
Isn't it though? But isn't it though? Kind of a little bit. You have to admit a little bit about Nene.
It depends.
I did this
I don't
thing
think
and
so.
you didn't.
I
Because
don't think
why
so.
do you need to post it on social media?
Because it's a form of journaling, and it's a form of sharing with your friends. Just like, you know, when you call a friend and you're like, hey, we just got back from blah, blah, blah. We had so much fun, yada, yada, yada. Social media is a different way of making phone calls now.
I guess my perspective, and this is me, and so I don't expect anyone to understand this or adopt this worldview. Was that forehead rubbing frustration? No, okay. Was that I'm so depressed and my confidence is so low. Maybe it's a sense of unworthiness or of not being able to have those experiences or guilt for having those experiences. But there's kind of a disgust I have that's associated with that extravagance. That I maybe I deprive
We get it.
myself.
You want your friends to be unhappy, okay?
Yeah. What I've learned from this is we're taking this bitch to Dorsia. That's what we're doing.
That's right.
That's what we're doing.
We're gonna get the 8 o'clock reservations.
I'll just have water, please. You know, like.
Yeah, but I think you guys. So this is Jim. Your question is a really complex one, right? Like and I think we're hitting all the different reasons why. Our buddy Byron in the chat, he said it really well, where he said the message of American Psycho is not to avoid nice things. Like that's the appeal of the movie wouldn't be there if you watched American Psycho and saw the life of Patrick Bateman and didn't have some degree of envy. Like I don't think that's the sin or a sin at all when you watch American Psycho. It's being absorbed by it, it being a culture of narcissism, having it turn you into a human selfie. Right, like these are the problems associated with it. But there's a power in wanting to have those things. I watched the film today, and that's one of the main things I felt when I watched this. I was like, "Damn, that's a nice place. I'd love to have a view like that." You know, but I don't think there's anything inherently negative in the desire to want to have nice things. I think what the negativity becomes is when it's an absorption into that lifestyle, such that you lose your authenticity, you lose identity, you devalue humans in place of material things. Right. My wife's never going to post a selfie on Instagram again of our food ever again. But yeah, no, that's a great question, because I think some of the way the film finds its power is in manifesting that desire in you. I mean, you are a white male, so clearly that was going to happen from the moment you turn the movie on, you know,
and saw my workout routine.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like you could kick his ass. He only does 1,000 crunches, Jim. You could do way more than that.
Yeah.
And Ben actually answered my question when he I think very intelligently when I asked what does Dorsia represent. So you guys answered two of my questions in one. I got one more question, but I've been taking too much time. I'll let you all go.
No. What's your last question? I'm curious. I think I said most of what's in my notes.
God, this is such a fucking superficial question, which is so ironic. This is such a dumb question. You guys have been asking such good questions. If Patrick Bateman were alive in 2019, which social media platform would Bateman use the most?
Insta. I mean, I think Insta or Snapchat. I think.
I feel like Bateman possibly be a video podcaster like us, except he wouldn't discuss movies. I think he'd discuss music.
You fucking nailed it. The easy answer is Instagram. And I thought that too. But then I was thinking the monologues, the talking, the way YouTube. He'd be doing what we do. We're basically, we're a conglomerate of, we're Patrick Bateman is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, we do little dances at the beginning of every podcast too.
I think he would use Twitter Trump style, basically. where he would just basically, it would just be a transcript of everything that's in his head at all times. You know what I mean? That way he gets the podcast, but it's in text form, and he gets the pictures and the video, and he can attach you know what I mean? He can attach, there's all, you know what I'm saying? So like, he'll be like, look at this fucking line at, you know, he used like, what Periscope. He'll be like, look at this fucking line at Dorsia, you know? So, yeah, so I definitely think that, but an obscene use of Twitter. Basically.
I could definitely see a reimagining of his confession scene where instead of calling his lawyer, he's just sending out a bunch of batshit crazy tweets, but everyone thinks it's a joke.
Oddly enough, that's a spoiler alert for Ingrid Goes West, but that's exactly what happens at the end of Ingrid Goes West, which is, I think, a really good satire as well. So that's it's not a Ingrid Goes West is a satire. I'll stand by that one.
And he would not step anywhere near Facebook because Facebook is for old people. I know that would be his argument for it too.
Yeah, I don't know if he could fit into 100 or 280 characters on Twitter. I think you're right, though. YouTube or Insta would be.
Actually, I have a better answer. LiveJournal, and I'll tell you why. Because he's so out of touch with everybody else. He doesn't know. He just wants to fit in, and nobody listens to him. Nobody hears him or sees him or cares about what he has to say. So it's basically like a platform where he gets to say everything he wants to say, and yet it's completely unheard and unseen. So I think LiveJournal.
Interesting. Dude, how did we miss this? Someone in the chat mentioned Tinder or Grindr.
I was thinking.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking that, but that's a dating app. That's a different question. But I definitely think he would use Tinder.
He sees Lewis on Grindr. Can you imagine what he would do? Yeah, that would. Yeah. This took a turn. This is what happens when I ask questions. You realize this. We go away from the intelligent shit.
What you're doing is you're rewriting it for today's modern age, and we're going to make a movie soon. Look for it. Deadly Analysis does American Psycho for 2020. It's coming to theaters.
Yeah, our Dorsia will be Olive Garden. So
if we can't get Hale after his Oscar nominations, then I'll have to get.
I just want to say there's this.
I'll need hair.
There's a part in the book. Actually, this was another part that made me laugh. There's a part in the book when he goes like to a deli, and he tries to order just regular people food. I think it was like a burger and a milkshake, and he doesn't know what to do with it. He doesn't know how to eat it. He doesn't know, like he's looking at the cup like it's an alien. He's not used to like plebeian food, so he can't like acclimate. And then he sees like an artist on the street with a cup. It's a coffee cup, and he drops like $100 into it, not realizing that it's for coffee. And he just dropped a dirty $100 bill, and she's like, "Hey, fuck you, asshole!" And he apologizes to her. He's like, "Sorry, he was just trying to help her." You know what I'm saying? So like, it's another moment of humanity where he's trying to do a good thing, but he ends up on not fitting in, not knowing how to be part of society. And so, anyway,
that's interesting.
Yeah. So I laughed because the reveal of it actually had coffee in the cup. It was surprising. So,
do you guys have any other notes? That's it for me.
I'm done.
All right. Well, let's score this movie. You guys want to score this movie? This would be an interesting score.
I'm ready to score.
All right. I'll shit. I gotta think about it a little more. Fuck. I was about to give my score, and then I'm like, wait, that's too low. All right. One of you guys go. Shut up. Don't look at me.
I'll go. So, as a horror film, I give it like a 0 because I don't think it's a horror film, not traditional horror. But as psychological torment, I give it like a 9. I think about the tragedy of him and the situation he's in, and the pressures of society, and all the things we discussed, and the feeling of being suffocated is definitely much more terrifying than the idea of a serial killer, just like slasher film. That just doesn't scare me. The psychosis of Bateman is what I find terrifying. So 9 on that in terms of just a slasher killer film. It doesn't even register. Not even 0. It's just no. Done. Good night.
Who else wants to go?
I'll go. I give this a 8 out of 10. This is a solid film. It's entertaining. I've seen it a bajillion times. I could probably quote along with it. But what's funny is I've seen it so many times and never ever thought about the fact that he's gay. And now that has been presented, it's a whole new movie, and I'll probably end up watching it a whole bunch more times trying to figure this all out because I think it's fascinating. So this is why I love doing this show. Even a movie I've seen a bunch of times gets kind of refreshing through all the different people's eyes. So that's why I love this kind of fellowship. But it does make me excited about going to see Bateman bring Paul back up to his apartment, and he smashes Paul, and it has a whole new connotation now. So smashes Paul. So yeah, I'm so glad that we did this because it's refreshing. I like this.
Okay, I'll go. I think I'm ready. All right. Yeah, I've seen this movie. I think it's my 3rd viewing of the film. I haven't read the book. We got a lot of shit for not reading the book when we did The Exorcist. So I like the way Jim opened this with, fuck the book if we're going to talk about the movie. Not that the book doesn't matter, but we're talking about the movie. But we did get into the book. Anyway, I saw this as kind of as a challenge of distortion in reality. Being caught up in the craving of approval from others. Materialism, I think, in fact, even the more we talk about this, it's starting to dawn on me that there's a really heavy emphasis in materialism in this film that I think becomes more central the more I think about it. One of the quotes from the author that I didn't get to, I didn't realize it was in my notes, says, and this is from the author of the book, says that the book is about lifestyle being sold as life. A lifestyle that never seemed to include passion, creativity, curiosity, romance, pain, everything meaningful wiped away in favor of surfaces, in favor of looking good, having money, having 6-pack abs, dating the hottest porn star, going to the hottest clubs. He says, I think Fight Club is also about this too. The idea that men are being sold a bill of goods about what they have to be in order to feel good about themselves or to feel important. No one can really live up to these ideals. So there's an immense amount of dissatisfaction roiling through the collective male psyche. Patrick Bateman is the extreme embodiment of that dissatisfaction. Nothing fulfills him. The more he acquires, the emptier he feels. And I think that last sentence can serve as something like a warning for people in 2019 about the way they approach materialism today, the way they approach sort of selfie culture today, social media. I'm never posting again on social media after this ever. It's over. So I that's sort of the superficiality materialism bit is something that dawned on me more the more I watched this movie, and even the more throughout the conversation we've had. So I'd give overall, the film wasn't scary to me. Don't necessarily think it was meant to be scary in traditional horror sense. Could maybe argue some of it was. I'd give it an 8 out of 10, solid 8 out of 10. I the more I watch it, the more I seem to get something else out of it. So I got to give it some extra points for that. So yeah, I give it a solid 8 out of 10.
All right, I'll go ahead and go next. I do think this definitely qualifies as a horror. I think it's actually pretty good. I would think about this as being sort of an existential horror, as I've mentioned. And honestly, yes, like the book doesn't matter or anything like that, but I think about the execution of the film in the success that it has in portraying what I believe it was supposed to be portraying. And like to be fair, I haven't actually read the book, so this is really just based on like other people's interpretations and so on and so forth. A lot of the monotonous sort of listing and ritualism and all of that, I think, was supposed to be definitely there for tension building. It was supposed to seem completely unfulfilling and ridiculous, and the murder was, of course, supposed to be seen as sort of like a release from that tension. But I think the underlying thing there was that why is that the case, right? So maybe for Patrick, like that was supposed to portray something close to something that was genuinely important, right? Like all this other stuff is completely unimportant bullshit. But whenever we're reminded about our own mortality, I think we can come to some really interesting realizations and some type of enlightenment. And that's a sort of theme that you see through all kinds of books and all kinds of movies. When people are reminded of their own mortality, they come to a point of enlightenment. And so I think that's really cool. The other part of this that I think is absolutely fascinating and honestly timeless, and if you consider this and make it about this timeless sort of element, then the book itself might even be classified as literature, and the movie potentially a classic in some ways. That there is this place within all of us that we're sort of trying to fill and bring meaning to ourselves, whether that's through religion or through materialism or through relationships or so on and so forth. Like, we as humans have this thing about us where we have to have this sense of meaning in our lives. We're always seeking meaning through one format or another. And so it really does speak, I think, to a deep sort of element of the human condition. And I think that's really cool about it. I don't necessarily know how much that was really portrayed clearly in the film, but it's definitely there. And really, the sort of elements that kind of like lead to the violent sort of explosions and the criminal behaviors, the psychopathic behaviors, really seem to stem from, as we've sort of mentioned, the repression of perhaps desires that didn't fit with the template of what this person thought was going to bring them meaning. And so that could easily apply to something like a religion, especially if we're talking about homosexuality, where it's this particular set of rules that you have to follow if you want to achieve the best possible life and then achieve meaning in life through life after death. You know, this, like, it can really be tied into a whole lot of different things. But again, like, this is me just sort of pontificating about what I think the meaning is supposed to be. I'm not sure that the execution was entirely there. The execution was good. I think the director did a good job for what they were given. This is a really heavy and difficult kind of thing to try and communicate, I think. But overall, I would honestly have to give this like a 7 out of 10, maybe a 7.5 out of 10, just because I think there is like important timeless elements here. But the execution was just a little bit confusing. You know, I mean, we got caught up in trying to decide whether or not the things that happened were real or not. You know, there's a lot there to distract you, I think, from the main point, or what I see as the main point. And that could have been cleaned up a lot more. And if they had cleaned this up, then it could have been close to a 10 out of 10. I don't know, man. Like, the themes here are themes that really hit home for me, honestly. So yeah, that's why I'm going to give it like a 7 or a 7.5.
Would you give it a higher rating if you considered how fucking amazing the goddamn soundtrack is? I'm sorry.
No, the soundtrack is absolutely amazing. That might push me to an 8. I don't know. Yeah, like, might get me to an 8.
You were using, I don't know if this was a joke, and I'm the only one who was like unsure if you were being cheeky or not, but you kept saying over and over that the film was well executed and things needed to be cleaned up. Is that a pun on purpose, or is that just a slip?
It wasn't an intentional pun, but I do appreciate your ability to pick up on that. Well done.
Yeah,
I didn't even notice. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Before Jim goes, I just want to point out Jonah had a very different interpretation than the rest of us, but it's okay because it's hip to be square. So, you know, I just thought I'd throw that out there. I'm never going to talk again. Please don't look at me.
Oh, by the way, this is an important question. The version of the movie that you guys saw, was it? Please tell me it was the NC-17. You would know if it's NC-17 because of the uncensored sex scene that he gives the Whitney Houston monologue.
Yes, I saw that one. That's the one I saw.
Okay, because the rated R version and the NC-17 version, it's like watching Goodfellas at 2:00 in the afternoon on like network television. It's so scrubbed and sanitized, you know, like it's not even worth watching. So if you saw the R-rated version, I'm going to say you didn't see American Psycho. You saw some bastardized version of it. So,
oh my gosh, since we're still on, can I say one more thing? And it's like just a little, and then you can talk to him. I forgot to mention when he is with the hooker and he like actually starts biting her. I felt like that was a great metaphor for consumerism and how we are actually literally trying to consume one another and consume stuff. So I forgot to mention that. So I just want to throw that out there, even though it doesn't matter because no one's gonna freaking watch this part.
I am going to add one more thing. There was a series a few years ago. There was a series of like movie inspired Ben and Jerry's flavor, and there was an American, you can Google image this, American Psycho flavor, and I forget, you have to look up to see what the flavor was. It had like gold leaf and shit in it, but there was a talk bubble coming from, you know, Patrick's face, and he said, "Don't just look at it, eat it."
It's called Ben and Jerry's Patrick Bait Mint.
Yeah, right.
I'm literally looking at it. Luxurious low-fat mint ice cream with Godiva chocolate chunks and a bloody red cherry swirl. Don't just stare at it, eat it. Nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
We always like end on ways that don't segue correctly to Jim. I just want to throw that out there. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Jim. How go from Patrick Bateman to your ending.
So yeah, I really liked a lot of what you said, Ben. You know, and it reminded me. I mean, this film reminds me of this quote by David Foster Wallace, which I'm going to read a little bit of it here, because and I'm quoting now. Because there's something else that's weird but true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everyone worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money or things, if they're where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths, and they will before they finally plant you. And that is what this movie is bringing about with what I believe to be a satirical horror lens. Now, I've never seen a movie that combines satire and horror quite the way this does. Godhole, as was brought up earlier, to quote Always Sunny in Philadelphia. This is it's a perfect mixture in my mind of using the horror genre in a through a satirical lens, and that's what I find most fascinating about this film. I still read it the way I read it at the beginning of the podcast, where I talked about how I think that some of this is actually really real. That much of this and much of the things that that are purported to be just in his head are simply the trappings of the genre conventions of satire, in which the genre conventions of satire allow for extremity in the work. I mean, as you know, I keep bringing up Modest Proposal. Arthur Miller wrote a great satire called Privatized Executions, where he also brought in a lot of this extreme imagery in order to pound home a satirical point. Those are the types of things that I find most interesting about this film. And so I sort of judge it based upon its adherence to satirical conventions, particularly Juvenalian satire. And in that sense, I find it to be a profound and interesting film, one that works in a nihilistic fashion, and it also works on a character level, buoyed by fantastic performances by all of the actors. I also think it's feminist, so I think there's so much going on in this film that I find it really interesting to sink our teeth into it for. We've sunk our teeth into it longer than the film has lasted, which is sort of both a boon to us, but also a boon to the film, because I think that in each case we've been able to really delve into some of these themes. For that reason, I give it a 4 stars out of 5, which sort of translates to an 8 out of 10. And the things that bring it back are, I would like there to be, without going into moralizing, without going into this is where you actually really can find meaning in life, without doing that, I would like there to be and but for other expedients. David Foster Wallace does it in This Is Water, but I don't see it in American Psycho. So it's a little too far into the nihilistic realm for my taste. That doesn't, but as a whole, I really like this movie, and I give it 4 out of 5. So.
Well, I just want to respond real quick to the David Foster Wallace thing, where he said, and if I understand this correctly, that religion doesn't have an excess that the other like materialistic things do. apparently he doesn't know about Greek mythology, where there are a shitload of gods, and there was never enough of them. That's kind of a bad joke, but
yeah, no, I mean like the full quote, I kind of preceded a little bit. The only choice we get is what to worship, and the compelling reason for maybe choosing some god or spiritual type thing, be it JC, Allah, or Yahweh, or the Wiccan Mother Goddess, or the Four Noble Truths, or some inviolable set of ethical principles. Basically, what he's saying is that in the case of an inviolable set of ethical principles, then you are free from the burden of making a choice for yourself, and also free from the temptation to choose the materialistic world over a inviolable set of principles that you've just been given from the, to quote him, Wiccan Mother Goddess. So that's the distinction that he's drawing in This Is Water, and it's a distinction that I think is interesting, and probably we could spend an entire podcast, like if we're going to do graduation speeches, the podcast, then we could talk about David Foster Wallace.
I call Neil Gaiman. There's a Neil Gaiman speech that he does at a college that is make good art. It's on YouTube. Look it up.
Yeah, there's a lot of commencement speeches are sort of this feast or famine kind of genre. You either get some of the most profound shit ever said, or you get like my commencement speeches. Well, now that you're an English graduate, you know whether cannot is one or two words. Like that was the greatest commencement. I was like, yes, now I know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life because you said that to me. Thanks. Yeah, Fareed Zakari also gives a really good one. But anyway, we're straying from the point. 4 out of 5 is my overall score for this film.
Well, I feel like we've just ended a church service, if you want me to be honest. This was preach, brother Jim. That's what they put in the chat. So I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. Zonstar is great seeing you. Byron, Dev, Aaron. We had a lot of people kind of interact tonight. Mostly Byron. I hope I'm saying his name right. So yeah, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter if you want to get our schedule. We only have 2 more films on the current schedule. I will be updating our next upcoming list with 5 more films. I got to go through and look. The way it works is we each select horror films that we like and we throw them on an Excel sheet. I'm almost out on mine, so I got to update mine and add some. So if there's any you want to see, like feel free to write it in the comments section of YouTube. Someone already mentioned Requiem from a Dream. We're doing that right after The Shining. So the next film we're going to do on March 10th is The Shining, The Shinin. And then after that, on March 24th, we are doing Requiem for a Dream. So join us. Check us out on, like I said, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You have any ideas, any films you want us to cover, let us know. Thanks for joining, and we will see you guys in a couple weeks for The Shining. Take care.